Brandon Cole thought humiliating a plainly dressed woman in front of wealthy clients would make him look important, but he had no idea he was about to insult the one person in that gleaming showroom who could destroy his career with a single sentence. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below, and if you believe respect should never depend on a price tag, make sure to like and subscribe. Now, back to Clara Bennett. Rainwater shimmered across the polished entrance of Westbrook Elite Motors that Tuesday morning, turning the glass walls into silver mirrors beneath the gray Chicago sky. Inside, rows of luxury SUVs and imported sedans sat beneath crystal white lights like museum pieces, each one spotless, each one carrying a six-figure sticker that silently announced who belonged there and who did not. Through those automatic glass doors walked Clara Bennett, 35 years old, wearing faded blue jeans, clean white sneakers, and a soft beige sweater that looked comfortable rather than expensive. Her chestnut hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and the only jewelry she wore was a slim wedding band that almost disappeared against her skin. To anyone glancing up from a sales desk, she looked like a suburban wife killing time after grocery shopping. Nothing about her suggested power. Nothing about her suggested ownership. And that was exactly why the eyes began to judge her the moment she stepped onto the marble floor. A young salesman near the coffee station straightened, ready to greet her, but before he could take 2 steps, Brandon Cole lifted one hand from the central sales podium. Brandon was the showroom sales manager, 42, sharply trimmed blonde hair, charcoal suit cut to perfection, cufflinks catching the overhead lights every time he moved. He had built his reputation on reading customers in under 3 seconds, or at least he liked to believe he had. Wealthy buyers got warmth. Casual browsers got polite distance. People he considered beneath the inventory got a smile that never touched his eyes. His gaze swept over Clara's jeans, then her sneakers, then the damp umbrella in her hand, and a smug little conclusion settled into his chest. Not a buyer. Just another dreamer. Brandon intercepted her with practiced elegance. "Good morning," he said, his tone carrying that thin layer of courtesy that somehow felt colder than rudeness. "Can I help you find the brochure section?" Clara returned a small, calm smile. "Actually, I came to look at the new Escalade Platinum." Brandon blinked once, then followed her line of sight toward the black Cadillac positioned under the spotlight in the center turntable. It was the crown jewel of the week, sticker price just under $120,000, detailed twice that morning for an investor walkthrough scheduled later that day. Brandon let out a faint chuckle through his nose. "That vehicle is one of our premium appointments." The word sounded polished, but the message underneath was simple: people like you don't casually ask for that car. Clara stepped closer to the display anyway, the marble floor clicking softly under her sneakers. She studied the sleek black finish, the oversized chrome grille, the cream leather interior visible through the tinted glass. Ethan had told her last month she should finally replace her aging SUV, and when he jokingly said she had access to the best inventory in Illinois, she had laughed and promised she would choose something herself one day. Today was that day. She wanted to surprise him by making the decision alone. "I'd still like to see it," she said gently. Brandon's smile tightened. Around them, 2 other salesmen had already noticed the interaction and exchanged the subtle amused glances of men anticipating free entertainment. Near the espresso bar, an older couple in designer coats pretended not to stare while listening closely. Brandon extended one manicured hand, not toward the vehicle, but sideways toward a rack of glossy pamphlets. "Of course," he replied. "We have printed information available for all visitors." Clara's eyes lifted to his, steady and unreadable. She understood the tone now. She understood the dismissal. But she had not yet realized just how public Brandon Cole intended to make that humiliation. Clara did not move toward the brochure rack. Instead, she set her folded umbrella beside the display platform and slowly circled the Escalade, letting her fingertips hover an inch from the flawless black paint without touching it. Brandon watched her with growing irritation. People who knew they did not belong usually retreated by now. They muttered an apology, grabbed a pamphlet, and drifted back into the rain. But this woman remained composed, almost as if his dismissive tone had rolled off her without leaving a mark. That unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He said again, this time louder, making sure the nearby customers could hear, these models are generally shown during scheduled consultations. Clara glanced over her shoulder. I only need a few minutes. Her voice stayed soft, but there was something precise in the way she answered, as though she had no intention of asking permission twice. Brandon stepped closer, the polished leather of his shoes whispering across the marble. A few minutes with a $120,000 vehicle is not how this works. One of the younger salesmen behind him coughed to hide a laugh. The older couple by the espresso machine openly turned now, pretending to compare brochures while following every word. Clara looked through the tinted window at the cream leather captain seats and the walnut trim Ethan had once mentioned was imported from Italy. She could already imagine his grin if she drove home in it unannounced. For a second, the thought warmed her. Then Brandon moved deliberately between her and the driver's side door. Perhaps, he said, lowering his voice into that patronizing register reserved for children and inconveniences, you would be more comfortable in our certified pre-owned lot across the street. The sentence landed exactly as intended. Clara felt heat rise beneath her collar. She had encountered condescension before, in restaurants, in board meetings where people mistook her for an assistant, in charity galas where donors looked first at Ethan's tailored suit and then at her simple cardigan. Usually she ignored it. Usually she smiled and moved on. But there was something about the public nature of this exchange, the tiny smirks gathering at the edges of the showroom, that made the insult sit heavier. She lifted her chin. I am interested in this one. Brandon exhaled through his nose, now openly annoyed that she refused to understand her role in the little social script he had written for the morning. He reached into his jacket and produced a laminated inventory tag. This vehicle is reserved for serious clients. Clara's eyes dropped to the tag, then returned to him. I am a serious client. Another salesman muttered, sure, under his breath, earning a couple of restrained chuckles from the reception desk. Brandon did not correct them. In fact, the faint smile at the corner of his mouth suggested he enjoyed the momentum. He gestured theatrically toward Clara's sneakers, still damp from the rain. No offense, but premium demonstrations require qualification. We have procedures. There it was. Qualification. Not financial paperwork. Not identification. Not appointment records. Just his personal measurement of whether someone looked wealthy enough to deserve courtesy. Clara stared at him for 2 full seconds, her expression unreadable. Then she did something Brandon had not expected. She reached into her purse and calmly removed her driver's license and platinum credit card. Then let us do the procedure, she said. I would like to test drive it. The room seemed to inhale. The younger salesman near the coffee station widened his eyes. Even the older couple stopped pretending not to listen. Brandon looked at the card, then at the simple woman holding it, and felt a sharp stab of wounded pride. She was forcing him into a public decision now. If he backed down, he lost face in front of staff. If he pushed harder, he could make an example of her. Brandon chose the second option without hesitation. He folded his arms, smiled with polished cruelty, and spoke loud enough for the showroom to hear. Test drives are for qualified buyers, not curious visitors. The sentence echoed off the glass walls. A hush settled over the luxury floor. And for the first time that morning, Clara Bennett felt the full weight of being intentionally humiliated in public. Brandon expected tears, or embarrassment, or at the very least the defeated shuffle of someone realizing she had wandered too far into a world not built for her. Instead, Clara simply slid the platinum card back into her purse with controlled fingers and met his eyes. That calmness irritated him far more than anger would have. Angry customers could be managed. Quiet ones had a way of making the room feel uncomfortable. Brandon gave a short laugh and glanced toward the reception desk as if inviting the others to enjoy the absurdity with him. This is not a sightseeing attraction. A ripple of amusement moved through 2 sales associates. One of them turned away quickly, but not before Clara caught the smirk. She felt the sting settle deeper now, not because of the refusal itself, but because Brandon had transformed her into a spectacle. Wealthy strangers, junior employees, even the woman at the cappuccino machine were all watching the plainly dressed customer, being reminded that some doors only opened for the properly packaged. Clara drew in a slow breath. "I asked for a standard test drive," she said. "That is all." Brandon tilted his head, his polished smile sharpening. "And I gave you a standard answer." He looked toward the front security podium where a uniformed attendant stood reviewing visitor logs. Brandon lifted 2 fingers in a subtle wave, not enough to call alarm, just enough to signal that assistance might soon be needed. Clara noticed it. So did the young salesman who had first tried to greet her. His expression tightened with visible discomfort, but he said nothing. In places like this, authority often wore a suit and a confident smile, and people learned quickly not to interrupt it. Brandon stepped half an inch closer, lowering his voice while somehow making it carry farther. "We reserve premium inventory access for clients who are prepared to purchase." Clara answered, "I am prepared." Brandon's eyes drifted once more over her sweater, her jeans, the umbrella, the sneakers. He wanted everyone in the showroom to understand the joke before he delivered the punchline. Preparation is not just a statement. It is usually evident. A couple near the financing office exchanged glances. Someone near the detailing window let out a tiny breath that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Clara felt her cheeks warm, but her posture remained straight. She had spent years helping Ethan build charitable partnerships, attending meetings where billionaire donors wore humility better than some sales managers wore silk ties. She knew exactly what class looked like. And she knew this was not it. Still, humiliation in public has a strange way of making even composed people feel suddenly small. Brandon extended one hand toward the glass entrance. "Why do not we save everyone some time?" he said. "You can browse online and come back when you are ready for this level of purchase." The words hung there, bright and ugly under the white showroom lights. Ready for this level. Not ready now. Not dressed for now. Not believable enough now. Clara looked around and saw what Brandon wanted her to see: the expensive coats, the chrome reflections, the employees pretending to work while listening, the invisible line he had drawn beneath her feet. Leave, and he wins quietly. Stay, and he escalates. For a brief moment she considered simply texting Ethan and ending the charade. He was upstairs in the executive conference suite finishing the quarterly investor review. One message from her and Brandon Cole would probably be apologizing within 60 seconds. But another feeling held her still. She wanted to know how far this man would go when he believed there were no consequences. Clara lifted her gaze and asked the question so evenly that it cut through the showroom murmur like a clean blade. "So your policy is to decide who deserves service by appearance?" Brandon smiled, relieved to hear what sounded like wounded indignation. This was familiar ground. He spread his hands with corporate innocence. "My policy is experience. Experience tells me who is serious and who is simply curious." Then he snapped his fingers toward the security attendant, who started walking across the marble floor. The measured footsteps echoed softly through the room. The young salesman near the coffee station swallowed hard. Clara turned her head toward the approaching guard, then back to Brandon, and in that suspended moment of silence, neither of them noticed the executive conference doors on the mezzanine level beginning to open. The security attendant crossed the showroom with the cautious expression of a man who did not yet understand why he had been summoned but knew enough to trust the sales manager's tone. His black shoes tapped lightly against the marble, each step making the already tense silence feel sharper. Brandon folded his arms, satisfaction settling over him like a tailored jacket. This was the moment he enjoyed most, the quiet public confirmation that his judgment ruled the floor. He did not need to shout. He did not need to insult her again. The sight of security approaching a casually dressed woman beside a six-figure vehicle would say everything for him. Clara stood motionless, one hand resting near her purse, her eyes fixed on Brandon with a steadiness that made his smile flicker for half a second. Most people looked away when embarrassed. She did not. "Is this really necessary?" she asked. Brandon gave a soft shrug. "We simply have to protect our inventory." Protect. Such a polished word for exclusion. The guard arrived within a few feet and offered Clara an apologetic nod. "Is there a problem?" Before Clara could answer, Brandon did it for her. "No major problem," he said smoothly. This guest was informed that premium access requires pre-qualification, but she seems unwilling to cooperate. Guest. Not customer. Not client. Guest, the kind of word businesses use when they want to sound courteous while showing someone the door. The older couple by the espresso station now watched openly. One of the junior associates stopped typing entirely. Even the receptionist lowered her phone. Clara felt dozens of invisible eyes settle on her shoulders. Public humiliation is rarely loud at first. Sometimes it arrives in polished vocabulary, in fake professionalism, in smiles that erase a person one sentence at a time. She looked at the security attendant. "I asked to test drive a vehicle." The guard shifted awkwardly. He was old enough to know this situation did not feel right, but hierarchy in luxury businesses can be a powerful silencer. He glanced at Brandon, waiting for direction. Brandon supplied it instantly. "And I explained that these demonstrations are not available without managerial approval." He then tilted his head toward the entrance with a graciousness that was almost theatrical. "We do not want to waste this lady's morning." Clara stared at him. There it was again, that deliberate insistence on making her seem misplaced, uninformed, almost foolish for trying. Something cold and clear settled inside her. She had given him every opportunity to step back. He had chosen the stage instead. "I understand," she said quietly. Brandon smiled, hearing surrender where there was none. "Wonderful." But Clara did not move toward the door. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Brandon's jaw tightened. "If you are planning to film this for social media, I should inform you that private recording on dealership property is restricted." Clara looked up. "I am not filming." She unlocked the screen with one calm thumb. For the first time, Brandon felt a small pinch of uncertainty. There was no trembling in her hands. No watery embarrassment in her eyes. She looked less like a customer being escorted out and more like someone verifying a final detail before making a decision. Upstairs, beyond the glass railing of the mezzanine, a set of walnut conference doors swung open. 5 men in dark executive suits emerged first, carrying folders and tablets, followed by regional investors in expensive overcoats. Their low conversation drifted down into the showroom like distant thunder. Brandon did not notice. He was too focused on Clara's phone. He said, voice sharpening, "I am going to ask you one last time to cooperate." Clara lifted her gaze past his shoulder for just an instant. Her expression changed so subtly that only the young salesman near the coffee station caught it. Relief. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just the faint easing of someone who sees exactly the person she expected. The salesman turned instinctively toward the mezzanine. His eyes widened. Brandon was still speaking. "Security can assist you if necessary." Then a familiar male voice, calm and unmistakably authoritative, floated across the white-lit showroom from above. "Assist my wife with what exactly?" The sentence was not loud. It did not need to be. Conversation stopped mid-word. Heads turned upward in unison. And Brandon Cole felt the first crack of panic begin to move through his chest. Every polished shoe on the showroom floor stopped moving. Brandon turned slowly, and the confidence that had been sitting so comfortably on his face seemed to drain away inch by inch. Standing at the mezzanine railing was Ethan Bennett, tall, composed, wearing a Navy executive suit with a silver tie that every employee in the building recognized instantly. Beside him stood the chief financial officer, 2 regional investors from Detroit, and the dealership's legal advisor, all of them looking down with the quiet attention reserved for a meeting that had suddenly become far more interesting than quarterly numbers. Ethan descended the staircase without hurry. That was the worst part. Men who panic rush. Men who own the room take their time. His shoes touched each marble step with measured certainty while no one below dared make a sound. Brandon felt his throat tighten. He had met Ethan Bennett dozens of times in Monday briefings, had memorized his expectations, his customer satisfaction metrics, his speeches about premium service and reputation. But he had never once seen Ethan look at him the way he was looking now, not with anger, but with a cold analytical disappointment that made Brandon feel smaller than any shouted reprimand ever could. Clara slipped her phone back into her purse and stood exactly where she was. Ethan reached the floor, walked directly past Brandon without acknowledging him, and stopped beside his wife. "Clara," he said softly, "I thought you were still deciding between this and the Lincoln." Brandon blinked. "Wife." The word did not simply register, it detonated. The older couple near the espresso station exchanged a shocked glance. The receptionist's mouth parted. The young salesman by the coffee machine nearly dropped his tablet. Clara looked up at Ethan, calm as ever, and answered in the same measured tone she had used all morning. "I was trying to decide, but your sales manager informed me that I am not qualified to test drive premium inventory." The room went silent in a way that felt almost physical, as though even the air conditioning had stopped. Ethan turned his head. Very slowly. His eyes settled on Brandon Cole. Brandon opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in years, every script he relied on failed him at once. There was no polished greeting, no managerial spin, no clever explanation that could erase the last 10 minutes. The security attendant took one discreet step backward. Ethan's voice remained perfectly calm. "Is that what happened?" Brandon swallowed. "Mr. Bennett, sir, I did not realize." Ethan lifted one finger. Not aggressively, just enough to cut the sentence in half. "You did not realize she was my wife," he said. "That is true." He glanced briefly around the showroom, letting his eyes pass over every frozen employee and every staring customer. "But she was still a customer when you denied her service." Brandon's face had gone pale beneath the white lights. "Sir, I was only following procedure." Ethan looked at the black Escalade, then at Clara's jeans, then back at Brandon. "Procedure." He repeated the word as though testing how ridiculous it sounded. "Show me the written policy that says denim disqualifies a buyer." A faint nervous rustle moved through the staff. Brandon's lips parted, closed, then parted again. Nothing came. Because there was no policy. Only his own arrogance, dressed in corporate language. Ethan nodded once, almost sadly, as if Brandon had answered by failing to answer. Then he turned to the gathered investors on the staircase landing. "Gentlemen," he said, "this morning we were discussing why luxury businesses lose loyal clients." One investor folded his arms, eyes fixed on Brandon with uncomfortable fascination. Ethan continued, "Apparently we no longer need a slideshow." A few employees lowered their heads. Brandon felt heat crawl up his neck. Public embarrassment had shifted direction now, and it shifted with brutal efficiency. 10 minutes earlier he had been the man controlling the room. Now he was the cautionary example standing in the center of it. Clara said nothing. She did not need to. Her silence had become heavier than any accusation. Ethan finally faced Brandon again, and when he spoke, his voice remained so controlled that every word landed harder. "Tell me something, Mr. Cole. If my wife had worn a designer coat instead of a beige sweater, would she have been qualified then?" Brandon's lips trembled before any sound emerged. "Sir, that is not what I meant." It was a weak sentence, the kind people use when they know the truth has already become visible to everyone around them. Ethan did not rescue him from it. He simply stood beside Clara with one hand resting lightly in his pocket, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. That calmness was merciless. If he had shouted, Brandon might have defended himself. If he had raged, the moment could have blurred into emotion. But this was worse. This was a professional autopsy conducted under showroom lights. Ethan let the silence stretch until Brandon became painfully aware of every customer, every employee, every investor watching him fail. "You did mean it," Ethan said at last. "You looked at my wife and decided she was not worth your time." Brandon shook his head too quickly. "No, sir, I was trying to protect the premium process." Ethan gave the faintest nod, as if listening to a child insist that rain was dry. "Interesting," he said. "Because our premium process starts with hospitality, not humiliation." The legal advisor on the mezzanine quietly closed his folder. One of the Detroit investors folded his lips inward, clearly trying not to react. Clara remained still, her face composed, but inside she felt the strange release that comes when someone finally says aloud what has been happening to you. Ethan turned slightly toward the young salesman near the coffee station. "You," he said. The young man straightened so abruptly he nearly dropped his tablet. "Did Mr. Cole attempt to offer my wife any assistance before denying her?" The salesman hesitated. Brandon shot him a desperate glance, but desperation has very little authority when truth is standing 6 feet away in a navy suit. "No, sir," the young man answered. Mr. Cole redirected her to brochures first. Ethan nodded once. "Thank you." He then looked at the security attendant. "And you were called because?" The guard shifted uncomfortably. "Because I was told the guest was not cooperating, sir." Ethan repeated the word guest under his breath, then looked around at the polished floor, the $1 million in inventory, the customers standing frozen with coffee cups halfway to their mouths. "Do all of you see the pattern here?" he asked, not loudly, but enough for every employee to hear. A woman enters our showroom. She asks to buy one of our flagship vehicles. She is laughed at, redirected, denied, and then nearly escorted out because she does not look expensive enough to satisfy one man's assumptions. No one moved. No one dared. Brandon could actually hear the blood pounding in his own ears. Ethan turned back to him. "Mr. Cole, how many clients have you silently disqualified this way when there was no owner's wife standing in front of you?" Brandon opened his mouth and then closed it. The question was not about this morning anymore. That made it infinitely more dangerous. Because now the investors were not seeing one rude exchange. They were seeing a liability. A brand risk. A measurable leak in trust. Brandon understood that too late. "Sir, I assure you this was a misunderstanding." Ethan gave a slow exhale through his nose. "No. A misunderstanding is when paperwork gets misplaced." He tilted his head slightly. This was judgment. The single word dropped over the showroom like a steel shutter. Clara finally spoke, her voice quiet enough that everyone leaned into it. "I gave him 3 chances to treat me like a customer." Brandon shut his eyes for half a second. Hearing it from her made the sequence replay in brutal clarity, the brochures, the pre-owned lot comment, the security signal, the smug little laughs. Ethan looked at Clara, then back at Brandon. And he used all 3 chances to perform. The older couple by the espresso station exchanged a knowing glance, as if silently confirming that they would remember this story far longer than any sales brochure. Ethan reached out and rested his palm lightly on the roof of the black Escalade. "My wife came in ready to buy this vehicle today," he said. "Instead, she was taught a lesson about how my showroom behaves when no one important is watching." He paused, then corrected himself with a colder tone. "Actually, everyone important was watching. We just did not know it yet." Brandon felt his knees weaken, because for the first time he understood that Ethan Bennett was not deciding whether to forgive him. He was deciding how publicly to make an example of him. Brandon's shoulders sagged, but Ethan was not finished. Public humiliation had begun with a sales manager deciding one woman did not belong, and now the correction would happen in the exact same place, under the exact same lights, with the exact same audience. Ethan turned from Brandon and addressed the showroom staff as if this were an unscheduled training seminar. "Everyone stop what you are doing." The command was quiet, yet immediate. Laptops closed. Tablets lowered. Conversations disappeared. Even the detail crew behind the glass partition paused with microfiber cloths in hand. Ethan slowly walked a few feet forward, positioning himself where every employee could see both him and Clara standing beside the escalade. "I want this remembered," he said. "Not because my wife was involved. Because this is what happens when ego replaces service." Brandon swallowed hard. Each sentence felt less like a reprimand and more like his professional obituary being written in real time. Ethan continued, "Luxury is not leather seats. Luxury is not chrome finishes. Luxury is not a six-figure sticker." He glanced around the marble showroom. "Luxury is making every person who walks through those doors feel respected before you know what is in their bank account." Several employees lowered their eyes. The younger salesman near the coffee station looked openly ashamed, not because he had done anything cruel, but because he had stood there and watched it happen. Ethan noticed him. Ethan noticed everything. "Silence helps arrogance grow," he said, letting the word spread to every corner of the floor. "If one person treats a customer this way and 10 others say nothing, then 11 people are responsible." That landed harder than Brandon expected, because suddenly he was not standing alone in disgrace. The entire staff felt implicated, and that made the lesson larger than one man's failure. Clara watched Ethan from the corner of her eye. This was exactly how he handled boardrooms when a system was broken. He never chased emotion. He exposed process. And once the process was exposed, people had nowhere left to hide. Ethan turned back to Brandon. "Mr. Cole, please remove your manager badge." Brandon stared, almost as if he had not heard correctly. "So?" Ethan's expression did not change. "Remove it." Brandon's fingers shook as they reached for the silver magnetic badge clipped to his charcoal lapel. "Westbrook Elite Motors. Brandon Cole. Sales Manager." He pulled it free and held it awkwardly in his palm, suddenly looking less like the authority figure who had controlled the room 20 minutes earlier and more like a man caught outside his own carefully manufactured image. Ethan extended his hand. Brandon placed the badge into it. Ethan did not even look down. He handed it directly to the legal advisor, who tucked it into a folder without a word. The gesture was small, almost administrative, and somehow that made it devastating. No shouting. No dramatic threats. Just one transfer of a nameplate, and years of status evaporated in front of everyone Brandon had once supervised. A faint murmur moved through the customers. The older couple by the espresso station exchanged another look, the kind people share when witnessing a lesson no advertisement could ever teach. Brandon's voice came out thin. "Mr. Bennett, please. I can correct this." Ethan finally looked at him with something close to pity. "You already corrected it," he said. "You showed us exactly who you become when you think someone cannot affect your paycheck." Brandon had no answer. There was no corporate language left, no policy, no procedure, no carefully polished smile capable of surviving that truth. Ethan stepped aside and gestured toward the showroom exit, not rudely, not theatrically, simply as a businessman closing a file. "Human resources will contact you by end of day." The words landed like ice. Brandon's face lost what little color remained. He glanced around instinctively, perhaps hoping for support, perhaps hoping someone would soften the moment. No one did. The sales associates who had laughed looked at the floor. The security attendant kept his hands clasped. The receptionist suddenly became fascinated by her keyboard. Brandon understood then that arrogance has many friends while it is in power, and almost none once power leaves the room. He took one slow step backward. Then another. The marble that had felt like his kingdom all morning now seemed to echo every retreating footfall. And as Brandon Cole walked toward the glass doors stripped of title, stripped of confidence, stripped of the audience he once tried to impress, Clara Bennett remained standing beside the black Escalade, silent, steady, and no longer the smallest person in the room. For several long seconds after the glass doors closed behind Brandon, no one in the showroom seemed certain whether they were allowed to breathe again. The rain outside streaked down the windows in thin silver lines, and somewhere near the service corridor a printer resumed humming, absurdly normal against the weight of what had just happened. Ethan looked around once more, making sure every employee understood that the lesson was not over simply because the culprit had left. Customer trust is built in moments exactly like this, he said. And it is destroyed in moments exactly like this. No one argued. No one even shifted. Then Ethan turned to the young salesman by the coffee station, the same one who had tried to greet Clara before being waved off. "What is your name?" The young man straightened. "Tyler, sir." "Tyler Morrison." Ethan nodded. "Tyler, would you please assist my wife with whatever vehicle she wishes to see?" Tyler blinked, then hurried forward with a mixture of nerves and gratitude. "Yes, sir." "Absolutely." Clara finally allowed herself the faintest smile. Not because Brandon was gone. Not because the room had flipped in her favor. But because Ethan had done something more meaningful than punish arrogance. He had rewarded decency, even if it had only appeared as hesitation in a junior employee's eyes. Tyler approached the Escalade and opened the driver's side door with both hands, this time not as a gatekeeper but as someone genuinely honored to help. "Mrs. Bennett," he said carefully, "would you like to sit inside?" The difference in the room was immediate and almost painful in its clarity. 10 minutes earlier she had been treated like an inconvenience standing too close to expensive leather. Now every eye watched with the kind of attentive respect that should have existed from the beginning. Clara stepped onto the platform and slid into the cream leather driver's seat. The interior smelled of cedar trim and new upholstery. Her fingers rested on the steering wheel, and for a brief second she simply let the quiet settle. Ethan leaned against the open door frame, his expression softer now that the public correction was complete. "Still thinking about surprising me?" he asked. Clara looked at him and gave a tiny shrug. "I was, until your showroom decided I looked too underdressed for good taste." A few nervous laughs escaped from the staff, the kind that come when tension finally cracks. Ethan smiled, but only faintly. Then perhaps the showroom needs better taste. Tyler, still standing nearby, looked like he was trying very hard not to grin. Clara glanced at him. "You were the only one who looked uncomfortable." Tyler swallowed. "I should have spoken up sooner." Clara shook her head. "You will next time." The words were simple, but Tyler received them like a private promotion. Ethan stepped back and gestured toward the dealership entrance. "Take it out," he said. "Full route. 20 miles if she wants." Tyler nodded eagerly and moved to the passenger side. Clara started the engine, and the low refined purr filled the marble showroom. Several employees instinctively stepped aside. As the Escalade rolled toward the glass doors, Clara caught the reflection of the showroom in the windshield, polished lights, frozen staff, investors on the mezzanine, and Ethan Bennett standing in the center like a quiet verdict. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. Tyler guided her through the dealership gates and onto the broad Chicago Avenue, but Clara barely heard his technical explanations about horsepower and suspension. Her mind was still inside that showroom, replaying the tiny choices that had built the morning: a smirk, a brochure gesture, a snapped finger toward security. Humiliation is rarely one grand act. It is usually a staircase of small permissions. And respect, she realized, is built the same way. One person offering it. One person withholding it. One room deciding which behavior to tolerate. 20 minutes later, when Clara guided the Escalade back beneath the awning, the dealership staff stood waiting in a line far straighter than any corporate welcome committee Brandon Cole had ever organized. Ethan met her at the driver door. "Well?" he asked. Clara stepped out, looked once at the black paint glistening with mist, then looked past it at the employees who could not meet her eyes. She smiled gently. "I like the vehicle," she said. Then her gaze shifted toward the marble floor where she had been nearly escorted out. "I am just deciding whether this showroom deserves the sale." The employees did not know where to look. Some stared at the floor. Some stared at Clara with forced smiles that came far too late to mean anything. The investors on the mezzanine remained in place, silently absorbing every second of the aftermath, because the true health of a business is never measured during smooth presentations. It is measured in uncomfortable moments when character is tested without warning. Ethan studied Clara's face, already knowing she was not thinking about horsepower or leather packages anymore. She was thinking about principle. And principle, once bruised, is not repaired by free upgrades. The sale is entirely your decision, Ethan said. No pressure from ownership? A faint murmur of nervous laughter moved through the showroom, but Clara did not smile this time. She stepped down from the platform and slowly walked across the marble floor toward Tyler. The young salesman straightened again, uncertain whether he was about to receive instructions or another lesson. Clara reached for the purchase tablet in his hands. "Can you process transactions?" she asked. Tyler nodded quickly. "Yes." Clara looked over his shoulder at the rest of the sales staff, men and women in polished jackets who had watched her humiliation unfold as if it were morning entertainment. "Then I would like Tyler to receive the full commission." Tyler's eyes widened. "Mrs. Bennett, that commission on this model is—" Clara gave him a small, calm smile. "I know." Ethan's mouth twitched upward with unmistakable approval. It was a quiet redistribution of consequence. The one employee who had shown the slightest trace of conscience would benefit. The ones who had laughed would watch that benefit happen. Tyler looked as if he might forget how to breathe. "Thank you," he managed. Clara turned then, not to Ethan, but to the gathered employees. Her voice was not loud, yet every syllable carried cleanly through the bright showroom. "I am buying the vehicle," she said, and several shoulders visibly relaxed, as though a sale could somehow soften the shame of the morning. Then she continued. "But not because anyone here earned this transaction." The relief vanished as quickly as it came. "I am buying it because one decent person still tried to help before the room decided I did not belong." No one moved. The receptionist blinked hard. One salesman shifted his weight and looked down at his expensive shoes, perhaps seeing for the first time how little polish can hide cowardice. Clara folded her umbrella under one arm and rested her other hand lightly on the hood of the Escalade. Raindrops from outside still glimmered on the glass entrance behind her, turning the morning light silver. "A luxury business can survive scratched paint," she said. "It can survive delayed inventory. It can survive market downturns." Her eyes moved from face to face. But the moment customers feel judged instead of welcomed, the building becomes nothing more than a warehouse with chandeliers. The room went perfectly still. Ethan did not interrupt. He knew a final lesson when he heard one. Clara looked at Tyler. "Please prepare the paperwork." Tyler nearly stumbled in his hurry to comply. As he rushed toward the finance office, the Detroit investors exchanged low comments with the chief financial officer, and for once those comments were not about revenue projections. They were about culture. They were about trust. They were about the hidden cost of one arrogant employee allowed to believe appearances were a qualification metric. Ethan stepped beside Clara and offered her his arm with an affectionate smile. "You still manage to surprise me," he said quietly. Clara slipped her hand through his. That was the plan. Together they began walking toward the executive offices while Tyler scrambled joyfully to prepare the